Firstly, thanks very much for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you here and to really get into a topic that I know is of particular interest and something that you're really passionate about. Looking at not just scaling sales teams generally, but actually more specifically within that, the importance and your approach to embedding MEDDIC and actually then looking at how that enables you and your teams to drive predictable growth. But I suppose before we go on, I probably a good opportunity for you to introduce yourself first.
Hey Tom, thanks for having me. Really nice to be on. So I currently lead Kollective EMEA. We're in the enterprise unified communications, video and observability space, very much a software-based infrastructure play. I've been there now for over a decade. As first part of my journey was an individual contributor, and then in various different management positions, and now, as I said, lead EMEA, so all the revenue functions in EMEA.
Fantastic. Well, quite a journey. So I'm sure more than a few things to get through over that period of time, and that journey, from individual contributor right through to, as you say, running a pretty big region and responsibility just now. But I suppose maybe then to set the scene, I've touched on the title already, and I suppose the scope of what you want to talk about. But I suppose crucially within that, it's probably actually important to understand from your viewpoint why it actually is. I can make my own assumptions, but why having repeatable, scalable processes actually really matters in the first instance.
Yeah, so I think every sales leader is looking for repeatable, predictable revenue generation. And if you don't have a standardized methodology in place, you're at real danger of scaling chaos, or being inefficient, or not being able to upskill your team to be able to deliver those predictable, scalable, revenue generation. So for me, in my experience, it's really important. And if you're in, let's say, my position, and there's lots of individual contributors that have made the jump or are looking to make the jump into a sales leadership role. One of the traps, and I learned from my experience, is you can fall into the super IC trap. So you've been very successful selling. Maybe you don't know why. Maybe you don't have a process. Maybe you're right on gut instinct, on hard work, and you figured it out, and you drove results. And now all of a sudden, you've got to get a group of individuals that have different backgrounds, different skill levels, different personalities, from different cultures, all driving revenue in a predictable way. And being the super IC, where you jump into every deal and rescue every deal and try and figure out every deal, and teach your guys to be just like you did it. And actually, you don't really know because you just did it, right? There's no process there. That's not efficient, and it doesn't scale.
Absolutely. And I suppose one of the really interesting things about your time with Kollective is that you've seen both sides of that. You've seen both sides of the coin. Experience being that that IC experience, maybe kind of making that transition and playing a mentor, a mentorship role, and then now obviously very much running the team and running the organization. So perhaps it's worth then maybe just zeroing into that in a little bit more detail about what your own journey was, and how you've seen that transition.
Yeah, so it's a good question. So I was a very successful IC at Kollective. Built good amounts of ARR, and of course, like every individual contributor that's doing well, you're pushing for a leadership position, and the business gave me that opportunity, and the region was, let's say, from a new business perspective, underperforming at the time.
Okay.
So you're faced with you're trying to grow revenue, you're trying to manage the team, you're trying to coach the team and mentor the team. And actually what I found is, what does good look like? And that was a very difficult question to answer, because as an IC, you knew what good looked like, but you didn't necessarily have the structure or the methods to get there. And I think one of the most important things that we did is we recognized that, and we said we need to roll out a formal sales methodology, something that was universally understood across the business, so that whether you're reporting from North America, from EMEA, or from APAC, it was a unified language that also enabled you to fix some of the common things that you see. So deals that aren't properly qualified, they fall out the pipeline late stage. Perhaps the close ratios are below where you expect them to be, or the average order ratios are below where you expect them to be. So you're facing all of these challenges, and rolling out a sales methodology really helped to start to address those challenges and start to provide the team with a structure and a framework, and more importantly, what does good look like within a deal? And I think that's been really successful for us.
So I suppose you knew what good looked like personally, but that shift actually meant that suddenly you could understand what good looked like for everyone, not just do this and this works.
Yeah, because you know what good looks like, but unless you have a structure to it, it's very difficult to train and repeat across multiple different salespeople. So bringing MEDDIC in that had a very clear structure, and we actually brought an external party in to come and train the entire sales team. So that was a great launch pad. And then, but that's really just the start point. Because you get together and everybody's super pumped up, and then you go back to field, and it's so easy to fall back into your old patterns, and that's what we noticed. And I think it's been a constant evolution process to one, consistently have people working towards that framework, driving better performance against that framework, and making sure that framework is embedded in culture. And I think we're a few years in, and we're very much at that point where it's now embedded into our culture. But it certainly isn't a let's get everybody trained, go back to field, carry on. It's a let's get everybody trained and on the job. Let's keep continuing to focus. And I can dive into some ways that we did that, if that would be of interest.
Fantastic. And you touched kind of in your intro, Glenn, on kind of, what I suppose is probably fairly common in the industry, but falling into that almost super IC trap. Is it fair to say then that transition to MEDDIC and the implementation was fairly crucial in you helping to avoid that or step out of that? And were there any other factors, I suppose, that you would you put down as crucial in that scenario?
Yeah, so I absolutely, because once you have the MEDDIC framework in place, everybody knows where they need to go within a deal, and that might be multi-threading. It might be testing to make sure you have a champion. It may be getting access to the EB, understanding the metrics and the pain that the company is really going through, so that in the end you can create the right level of urgency and prioritization around this piece of technology to get that stakeholder buy-in. And then with that information, it's then much easier for the sales team to build and help their customers build and frame and shape a business case that they can then take to a steering committee. And without that, and if I look back, without that MEDDIC framework, it's very, very difficult to achieve that. And as the super IC or as the sales leader, you're getting involved in all the deals. You want to hear all the conversations, and you want to try and steer things how you would have steered them. And as I said, it's not scalable and it's not efficient.
Excellent. And so I know you've talked to me previously away from this discussion about actually how, if we look at that, MEDDIC implementation, not just as being something that you implement and then, hope it runs off and, runs smoothly, but actually there's a real story there to focus on from, actually the decision making before, implementing, MEDDIC or indeed any other methodology, some of the, maybe the issues you faced as you tried to implement that, and then actually how you got that to what is now obviously a really smooth running process for you. So I'm keen to get your view on actually what that implementation story looks like for Kollective, as a whole, and actually the role that you played within that, particularly looking at EMEA.
Yeah, so it's a really good question. So when we first rolled MEDDIC out, we had a Salesforce plugin that attached to each opportunity. And that was very useful because, put the onus on the salesperson to complete the information. And a lot of those fields were hard gated against opportunity stage. So you couldn't move out of an opportunity. You can exit an opportunity stage unless the information was there. And that worked very well. And one of the things that we did in EMEA is on a group pipeline call on a Monday. At the end of the pipeline call, we'd pick an opportunity, and that particular, whether it was a net new business salesperson or an account manager, would walk everybody through what MEDDIC looked like for that opportunity. And that created a lot of dialogue amongst the team. Perhaps the laggards got to see what the people that were really driving it forward were doing. So a little bit of inspiration, a little bit of learning, a little bit of encouraging for them. So that was really useful. But as a sales leader, there was still a huge onus on you to read everything that was in Salesforce, because there were no checks and balances on the content. The sales guy could write whatever they wanted. So I attended a sales leader summit that our VC put on in Chicago, and I was introduced to a platform called Accord, and it's a deal execution platform. And so I looked into it, and what I really liked about Accord is it combined MEDDIC with a deal execution process that brought the customer into the deal. And some of the benefits that we've seen with that platform is the information that is being captured via the discovery that would populate MEDDIC is then inputted into that platform, and is then, the vast majority of that information, decision process, decision criteria, some of the objectives the customer's trying to resolve, is then available for that customer to see. And what we've found is that the customer, it then becomes a mutually owned shared document that the customer starts inputting into. So what that meant for us is the data that the salespeople were inputting was now being validated because it was available for the customer to see and make sure they were happy with it, and it was reflecting the conversation and their situation. So that was a real plus side. So it drove MEDDIC discipline higher without that constant manual intervention. And the other side of that platform, which is still very true to MEDDIC, but more on multi-threading, everybody will say to you, there isn't a single person that buys software these days. It's 8, maybe 10 people that are involved in buying software. That platform, highly encourages multi-threading by helping you map out the key people, whether that's a champion, whether that's an economic buyer. Maybe you've got multiple champions, so you can map those out, invite them into the platform, and they can then have input onto what that business case looks like, what their needs are. So you can start to get alignment across multiple stakeholders, and that's been really successful for us. And some of the back end functionality of that platform is it will leak table people's execution score. So you can start to see at a glance who in your organization is executing well, who needs the most help. So you can start putting your time where it's needed. And then on an individual basis, it will start to highlight, this particular salesperson is really good at this part of MEDDIC, but they're not so good at this part of MEDDIC. So as a sales leader, you're not looking at everything and trying to figure out what you need to work on, which isn't efficient. You're actually starting to see who needs help, where they need help, and even your best people that are flying, are there opportunities for them to do better? And I had an instance last week, where one of our guys that is consistently executing the best, actually the platform highlighted that his metrics were a weak spot. So as a sales leader, it's great. My coaching is for him now is, yeah, how do we get your metrics better? Because that's ultimately going to improve, his revenue generation.
And you're getting almost a highlights reel by the sound of it for for each individual rep, or highlights and lowlights, but in the positive sense that you can then be selective in what you're impacting.
It gives me as a sales leader almost a deal control room where I can see what's going on and see what levers I can pull to drive better performance.
And then maybe to go back to some of those earlier meetings you were having, where I suppose the real life examples that you were getting of people who were going through a process, understanding to what extent they were in some respects doing what they were intending to do, but actually you had that real life conversation. Did that technology, and for maybe other sales leaders in similar scenarios who might be having that slight, adjustment to a methodology or a new methodology, was that kind of technology the tipping point then that actually meant that not only you saw the benefits and how things could be tweaked, but did the team internally start to see that themselves as well?
Very much so. I was expecting a level of pushback. Your salespeople being told, "Hey, we're going to use this new platform," and it's natural. But actually, the buy-in was very strong, and I noticed the buy-in was stronger amongst my higher performers, which I didn't expect. But they were really keen, and I think that's helped other people in the region go, this is something I need to pay attention to, because the better performers are using this. And I firmly believe that they've become better salespeople because of a combination of that platform and MEDDIC. And they are driving deeper, more meaningful discoveries. They are multi-threading more than they've ever done before. And we actually got some feedback from a customer back in December. He said, "I've been buying from salespeople for 15, 20 years, and this is the most professional approach I've ever seen." And and that was based off of the new platform. And I think that's the benefit of it. It's driving disciplined performance and pushing the envelope on what my guys are doing in the field, but also presenting us in a really professional way. And we're competitive just like anybody else, and that impression counts.
Absolutely. And I suppose the nature of that, even just looking at, for example, the shared documents, means that it's genuinely a shared experience, during that. So, yes, of course, there's an element of being sold too, but actually really, sounds like you're selling with them and actually going through that process together. And so,
absolutely,
quite the reference in simple terms. And I know then, and I mean, I can tell from what we've discussed and what we've gone through today, Glenn, that this has obviously been a really considered process and approach for you. It's obviously you're not kind of process for process sake, but I think I'm correct in understanding that it's not just about the methodology, it's not just about the technology, but it's also the data within that. I think that's really helped you to accelerate your coaching and the team's growth.
That's right. Yeah. And I think that it's a key point. It's not process for process sake. In the end, our job is revenue generation, and the only way we can do that effectively is by consistently executing on the right things. And in our world and other SaaS worlds, it's understanding that the pain your customer's trying to resolve, the level of urgency attached to that pain, and what outcomes they drive by solving that pain. And I think any process that we put in place, that's our North Star. Does it take us closer to be able to do that and execute that consistently, or does it take us further away? And this certainly takes us closer to that.
And if we then look, I suppose, at some other kind of takeaways almost that you might want to share with people who are in similar situations. Perhaps they're about to go on this journey, maybe they're midway through it and kind of dealing with some of the more tricky parts that you've described yourself. But what would your main kind of takeaways and insights be, reflecting on the past decade as a whole, but then also this really intriguing leadership journey within that, Glen?
Number one takeaway is, if you're going to implement a methodology, get buy-in from senior leadership, and not just within sales senior leadership. The methodology has to become pervasive across the organization, so that it becomes part of your DNA. So the CEO understands it, the CRO understands it, the chief product officer understands it, the chief marketing officer understands it. That's really important, because that will help you embed that culture within the organization. And the second point, and we discussed, I spoke to a CRO recently, and MEDDIC was their absolute go-to methodology. And one of their challenges was getting MEDDIC embedded. And as we've discussed, use technology, because technology can help you drive better experiences for your customers, but also drive better adoption and execution of a methodology.
Looking back on that, then Glen, it's been really intriguing to hear your views in a relatively unique situation, I suppose, having been into an environment, been extremely successful, without some of the the almost the guidelines and structures that actually have since been put in place, but then being able to to actually coach a team through that same journey, but maybe reflect on some of the things actually that you look back and you might have wished to adapt, or certainly now it sounds like of pushing not just kind of mid performers, but actually even your top performers to to really push themselves further and further. So thank you for kind of taking us through that in so much detail. I suppose the only other thing I would ask then before we wrap up would be, are there any other pieces of kind of insight or I mean, let's call it wisdom from your point of view that you'd be keen to share?
I think all of this speaks to, from what I've seen, there's kind of two approaches. You've got a product-led approach, which is so common amongst the sales community, and you've got a business problem-led approach, which is less common. And I think that's largely because everybody feels very safe being the subject matter expert and walking into a room with some slides and being the expert on them. And that's very important. But actually, in today's world, by the time the customers got to you, they've probably done 60% of their evaluation. The information's out there. And to really drive revenue generation, you have to tap into the business problems they're trying to solve. And I think if you're leading a team or thinking about leading a team, or you're an individual contributor, move yourself into the business problem centric salesperson, because it will drive better, consistent, repeatable, better results. Excellent.
Well, Glen, it's been really interesting to listen to you today. It's been fantastic to get all of your insights, and I wish you the best of luck with everything that you and the team have coming up at Kollective. It certainly sounds like you're set up well for an exciting 2025.
It'll be super exciting, and thanks for having me, Tom. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Glen.